Everything is Awesome is part of Courts and Parts, a podcast network featuring pop culture, TV, movie, and geek podcasts. Check out some of our other shows, like TV Ate My Brain, Let's Chat with Revelin Friends, and Podstalgic at courtsandparts.com.
Awesome.
Just tell people they're awesome and mean it.
Awesome.
Awesome. Awesome.
Did you have an awesome time? Did you drink awesome shooters and listen to awesome music and then just sit around and soak up each other's awesomeness?
Awesome. 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 That was awesome. You guys are awesome. No, you're awesome. No, you are awesome.
Sir, you are awesome. Seriously.
Awesome. Awesome. Awesome.
Everything is awesome.
Welcome to this week's edition of Everything is Awesome. I am your host, Kevin. This is a show where we sit down and talk to awesome people about awesome things. But it's that time of year where we switch it up a little bit. We're still talking to awesome people, and we're still talking about awesome things, but not necessarily their awesome thing. Last year, around this time, we partnered up with another podcaster to sit down and chat about the Invasion crossover on the CW DC Berlantiverse shows. And just like last year, we're doing it again this year. Just a new partnership and a new crossover to talk about. That's right, we're talking about the 4-part crossover Crisis on Earth X. And to help me discuss that, we're bringing in a friend of the show, officially a super friend of the show, who will have to get on to showcase them as a person. But until then, we're going to talk some Green Arrow, The Flash, Legends of Tomorrow, and of course Supergirl. Please welcome to the show, Brian. I didn't confirm how to say your last name, so I'm going to take a stab at it. Stever? Or is that too on the nose?
It's spot on, man. You nailed it. Hi.
Oh, okay. Nice. Brian Stever from the Take Two podcast. Thanks for being here, man.
Oh, thank you for having me on the Everything is Awesome podcast. This is exciting. I'm glad that you used super friend in describing me. There's a little hidden meaning in there. Fun little rivalry that we have going with our Superman versus Batman love affair that each of us have, of course.
Well, it's from the very beginning of this podcast. Like I wanted a name to call like the fan base,
okay,
and because like it's that comes from my wrestling fandom where you have like the peeps from Christian, the Edge heads for Edge. They're the only two that are coming to mind because I listen to their podcast on a regular basis. But so I was like, oh, who do we have? Like what we like? We're not like Hulkamaniacs. There's the key one.
Yeah,
that's the one everyone knows.
Yes.
And the first thing that popped to my head was Super Friends. So that's I've taken that from. I'm sure it's probably trademarked by DC, so please don't sue me. But
no. What you like the wrestling podcast? We have a wrestling podcast over at Take Two Podcast. We have a spinoff called Take Two Takedown. Some of our guys do the WWE style wrestling talk all the time. They're big into it.
Yeah, I have to get on those episodes that you guys do, but I've actually, because I don't watch much wrestling anymore. Just because I have the WWE network that I need to start utilizing, so I don't feel bad that I'm spending the money on. But I listen to Edge and Christian almost weekly because they're I don't know. Do you listen to any of the wrestling podcasts?
Only my own. I fell off the last time I was listening to wrestling. I was a degenerate for Degeneration X back in those days.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, and I haven't watched on a regular basis since Shawn Michaels retired, and he was my quote unquote hero. Like when I was a kid, I said I want to be Shawn Michaels, to the point where the very not my first gimmick, but when I wrestled in the backyard, really early on, I was Heartbreak Kev, and had the red sights with the white and black heartbreaks. Had the motorcycle hat with the zebra print on the top, the heart-shaped glasses, and those like arm-length gloves that he had.
Yeah.
I had all that going on in that gimmick, and then eventually when we got a little bit more serious, I switched gimmicks up, but I kept what I called the Heartbreaker, which was a super kick, but to the chest, not to the chin.
Mm.
And I kept that as like a one of my handy dandy moves that I would lay on people.
Very nice. So you're gonna think I'm saying this just to kiss your ass because I'm on your show, but I applied junior into senior year of high school. I actually sent in an application to go to Shawn Michaels Heartbreak Kid Wrestling School in
Okay.
Texas.
Yeah, I don't know if I ever went that far. I definitely got a lot of when he had that school. I definitely got a lot of information about it, and I know I considered it, and I don't know because that his school was around right around like when I was graduating high school. So I don't know if like I just ended up being too young, and I think what it ended up being is I'm just too lazy and like I don't follow through with things. But I actually we lucked out because the group of guys that we did it with, like we were pretty serious. We built a ring in a friend's backyard, uh, got shut down by the township, and had to tear that ring apart. Went to another buddy's backyard, bought a ring, and then we started training with like a local a local place that would put on monthly shows or bi-monthly shows or something like that. And then we eventually just got our own wrestling license here in the state of Pennsylvania and started putting on our own monthly shows, and we somehow got connected. I don't know if you were into the independent scene back in the 90s. But Reckless Youth was like the king of the independents, and I only know this because like, I didn't follow the indies at all.
Okay.
But so I only know it because he was there. He came
Gotcha.
in and he started wrestling with us, and he ended up training. Like he's the guy who's like my official trainer, which is neat because if you don't know anything about him, like he was in the WWE farm system at some point. He's mentioned in William Regal's book. Like Regal trained him, and he was he was on the cover of I think Pro Wrestling. Was it Pro Wrestling Magazine? Is that the name of like the?
That sounds right. Yeah.
He was on their cover at one point. He held like every major indie title at some point, and he was like a huge deal. Was supposed to like make shockwaves, and they couldn't figure out what to do with him. If I remember correctly, the WWE farm system had offered him. Do you remember? This may have been. This was right around the merger of the, like WWE and WCW, when Billy Gunn partnered with Chuck Palumbo, and they were Billy and Chuck.
Yes, of course.
And their manager Rico with the sideburns, they wanted to give that gimmick to Reckless Youth, and he said, what do I do? Like that's a dead end gimmick. Once that kind of pans out, I'm left with nothing. And
right.
And then life eventually caught up with him, and he had kids and whatnot. So he didn't ever, I think, go beyond OVW or whatever it was at the time. But yeah, so I'm like, long story short, I was trained by him. I was trained by.
Very cool.
Yeah, and it's funny because I started talking to a couple buddies of mine from back in those days. Again, we like a lot of us just kind of fell apart and stopped talking for a few years, and we started talking. We're like, what did we do it again? And we all said in a heartbeat, to the point where I was like, I think no matter what, I want to do this one more time. Like, I know I'm 30. Yeah. I'll be by next summer. I'll be 34 years old. But I mean, if Goldberg can get, I mean, and I'm not in Goldberg shape, but if Goldberg can come back and do it, I can do it one more time.
And so all that training is what got you booked for your role as a stuntman on this CW crossover series.
Oh my God, that would be a dream come true.
Right.
And yeah, and that's what we are going to talk about today is Crisis on. Now, as I saw 2 hashtags the other day, and I actually honestly didn't pay that much attention to the title of the crossover. It is Crisis on Earth X, right? Not of Earth X.
No, it's on. Yeah,
Okay.
because they had to go there. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I assumed. That I saw another hashtag as I was using it the other day, and I was confused, and now I just looked at my tablet, and all my notes are missing.
Oh
So
no.
here we go. They were accidentally deleted. Not a problem. Recover. There we go. This
There we
is
go.
how. This is behind the scenes, folks.
Beauty of editing is what we're about to see.
No, we'll see. I'm not a good editor. So
No? Okay.
no, well, I mean, as we've all heard on the roundtable episode, that was heavily edited. But when I have a feeling there's going to be zero audio drift issues today, which means that there's going to be very little editing on my part, because I'm just a lazy podcaster, and I feel like that just makes me better in the long run.
I like
So,
it.
so you're a big fan of the CW shows?
Yeah, I enjoy 3 of the 4.
Oh, interesting. I think I want to find that out naturally as we talk about the crossover. Though, um, I guess let's. I do want to kind of address it on the top of the episode here. That the What are your thoughts as far as the crossover as a whole compared to Invasion last year? That was heavily marketed as a four part crossover, but really, Supergirl was nothing part. It was really nothing part of the Invasion storyline until a 30-second clip at the end that was, I think, repurposed the next night on Flash.
Yeah, I think 30 seconds might even be generous. I think last season was they needed to do 2 things. A, find out if they could pull it off. B, they needed some people to watch Supergirl because it was their first season on CW, and it forced everyone who wasn't watching Supergirl to watch an entire episode just to then get to that last scene. But then it made everybody grumble afterwards. Hey, I just had to, suck it up for this episode of Supergirl. And I wonder how many fans they actually got out of that. But I felt the crossover last year was fun, but I don't think it had as much depth as this one did. And they actually incorporated some storylines from each of the 4 shows a little bit into this one. So just comparing the 2 off the top, I loved this one far, far better than last year's.
Yeah, and last year's I enjoyed. My biggest complaint was mainly marketing, and it was surrounded by that Supergirl debacle where it was marketed as night 1 of the Invasion crossover, and really, like, save for the breaches opening randomly throughout the episode, there was nothing until that last little scene that we saw, I think, at the open of Flash the next night.
Yeah, definitely.
And my thing was, like, you could have easily kind of done that episode and incorporated Barry to help Supergirl throughout that. Like, you could have just had, like, have Barry and Cisco fall out of the breach onto the Thanksgiving table in the middle of dinner, and have them help Supergirl throughout that episode. And I don't think the story would have changed at all if you just incorporated that, and at least it would have been a little bit more interconnected. But yeah, and I also feel like last year, and we'll probably touch on this as we talk about the other episodes for this year, but and I don't know if this is a good or bad thing, but last year's episodes, each one felt like that show's episode, and they worked Invasion in. So, like, the Flash episode felt like a Flash episode, Arrow felt like Arrow, and Legends felt like Legends, and they worked in the Invasion storyline, where this year it felt like they treated it as just a 4-hour storyline. And I'll get into more details about it, but I don't feel like specifically with Supergirl and Flash, they didn't feel like they were like Supergirl based or Flash based at all.
No,
they felt a little bit more generic, but I'll get into that. And I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. After watching the whole event, it's probably actually a good thing that the 4 episodes this year didn't really necessarily feel like they were pigeonholed into telling not only the crossover story, but like the individual show story.
Yeah, and also I felt last year's kind of went to each show's style. Like Arrows last year was definitely an Arrow style episode versus Flash was more a Flash style and etc.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And and I think just based on overall, in fact, here's my note on I guess the event from last year and this year. Invasion almost felt forced, especially with the Supergirl episode, and not really being part of the crossover. Uh, Whereas this year, each show seemed to set up naturally, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's funny, early on in my notes, one of my biggest gripes is that the Supergirl feels like an episode of The Flash because it's centered at Barry's wedding.
Right.
But as the event goes on, I think I've realized that there's no other way to kind of do that, and it was kind of nice because I still feel like, generally speaking, Arrow felt like it hit all the points it needed to be an Arrow episode, and Legends hit all the points that needed to be a Legends episode. But then Supergirl and Flash kind of reversed each other, where the Supergirl episode, I think, hit all the notes to be a Flash episode.
Okay.
While like the main story points in the Flash episode were very Supergirl centric. So I guess we can hit those.
Sure.
We can kind of hit on that as we talk each episode. So I guess the best way to start this out is Supergirl. Let's start with Supergirl.
Okay.
So I guess because now we need to figure out what of the 4 shows you don't like. So let's start with Supergirl in general. What, is this a show that you follow on the regular basis?
This is a show that I do watch regularly. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. I was worried because that seems to be the one that normally some people don't, and that Flash and Supergirl are like, I think, the flagship shows of this network now, and so I appreciate that you actually do watch Supergirl.
Which is crazy since Arrow has been on the longest, but you're right.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to, and actually, I think in technically last week's episode of Everything Is Awesome, my guest and I talked about the Berlantiverse and how Arrow did start everything off, and but here we are in 2017, 6 years into this little Berlantiverse that they got going. And I would say if I had to pick one show that's the flagship show, it's The Flash. It seems like the strongest of all the 4 shows, and it definitely has opened up the opportunities for these other shows to exist, especially in a way where you have the multiverse to deal with.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Legends kind of spun off of the Flash more so than the other ones. I think the majority of the Legends characters come from the Flash with a mild mixover of Arrows. So that totally makes sense. And with Arrow kind of being down ratings wise last year and the year before that, and Flash really taking hold, you're spot on with how the Flash is the number 1 flagship.
Yeah. But yeah, so Supergirl is one of my, it's if I had to say, Supergirl and the Flash kind of like are so close to me because they feel the most similar in tone. But if I had to pick one, I would say Supergirl ranks number 2 for me.
Okay.
It's my second favorite of the 4 on the network. But I would say, like, the best thing about this episode for the crossover is that it actually felt like it was part of the crossover.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
This is where I think that the wedding of Barry and Iris, because that seemed to be like the A plot of this episode, and it hit on minor things in Supergirl, like Supergirl's world, as far as like little moments that it addressed. Like I think it was like it seemed like the B and C stories were Kara's her she's still trying to deal with being, whether she's a human or an alien, like she's trying to reconcile the whole, even though that I think they addressed Manel's back, and she's still kind of dealing with, oh, that's a human emotion, why do I have to deal with that? And Alex is, I guess would be the C story with her dealing with the fallout with Maggie. But it felt like, I don't know, this episode felt very Flash heavy to me.
Yeah, like you said, both shows are very similar in style, so I can get that. Let me ask you real quick. Did you watch them one at a time? The two of them on Monday and the other two on Tuesday?
I ended up having to play catch up, so I finished everything over the weekend.
Okay.
And I ended up watching, but I did watch them, in the intended order. I watched them, I think, in 2 days. I think on Saturday, or maybe Sunday, I watched Supergirl and Arrow, and then either Sunday or Monday into Monday afternoon, I watched Flash and Legends.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I caught up too, and I kind of watched them in the order you were supposed to, but I hodgepodged them together to a degree where it made the four of them feel like one part. Where like you were saying, last year's definitely had their own styles. This one, the diehard fans could tell, okay, this is the Flash, this is the Arrow style episode. But I felt like all four of them merged together really nicely. And I think that's a big reason a lot of people liked it.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree. And I would have, like, being that guy that can pick out those subtle differences. I made sure to, that's what I was really kind of paying attention to when I started taking notes. And so I actually think that for the general audience, it just felt like one big storyline, and I think that's what it needed to do. That's why it is, I think, much better than last year's. Even though I loved Invasion, I think that Crisis handled it better because it did feel. Again, I think if you really look at the stories that were being told, especially the B and C stories of each episode, that kind of seemed like it dictated what the episode was really about. Again, except for Flash and Supergirl, I feel like they kind of had a role reversal. But as you said, they, or as maybe I said earlier, they're similar in tone. So I wonder if that has something to do with it. They're just so similar in tone that it's hard to decipher what was actually happening. But it just, whereas the wedding was the focal point of this first part. Part 3 seemed to focus heavily on Kara's importance to the Earth X invasion, and that seemed to be the A story, while some Flash storylines were the B and C stories.
Makes sense.
But overall, I mean, I think if I'm a general audience member who just loves watching TV and happens to be these superhero shows, I don't think you notice a difference in any of them, because they felt like they it didn't go from bright and happy to dark and gloomy to bright and happy to bright and gloomy. It just kind of had an overall tone that was established in each episode that matched each other.
All right, so the Supergirl episode, let's start off with probably the biggest gripe of all time of probably any female that was watching this episode. And that is how all of these characters, it's the day before the wedding, are all figuring out that they need to respond and RSVP if they're going to be attending or not the wedding. How furious would Iris be in real life? Any bride would be like, no, these people didn't respond yet. They're out. There's no way. I didn't book enough plates. I already went on to my B list. Yeah, the way they're getting all the characters together, ooh, should we go? I need a +1. Will you be my +1? Will you go with me? I was like, what the heck? No bride would have accepted this.
It was very strange. And I guess, my argument, I guess, in favor of those scenes is that Iris seems to be a character that understands the world she lives in and understands that, you know what? Maybe Oliver was too busy fighting crime to remember to RSVP. It's a stretch. I have to stretch that line of thinking pretty thin to where you can almost see through the little silk bridge I'm building here. But I think I can. I think I can buy it.
Okay.
You know, in a world of superheroes, I can buy it. But I totally agree. I think one of my gripes about like the invites specifically is that there's and I know why, and I'll get to that in a second. But one of my biggest gripes is that there's no way that Barry Allen and Iris West invite uh, Mick Rory to their wedding, and not John Diggle. Like,
Yeah.
there's like that made no sense to me until like I really kind of sit down and think about something that I feel like kind of going back to Invasion, like as the shows were leading up to the invasion, they kind of like unnaturally shoehorned in like plot points to get to it, to get to the invasion episode. Whereas this happened like to get to the Crisis on Earth X crossover episodes, everything seemed to happen pretty naturally and was kind of set up early on in this episode, if they needed to establish anything else. But one of the things I realized is the only reason Diggle on Arrow has nerve damage was so that they could get to a place where Oliver has to put this hood back on for this invasion or for this crossover episode, for Crisis, which still, like, I feel like there's a story you could tell where Diggle is still the Green Arrow and Oliver's just still a badass, right, you know, during this crossover event. But yeah, it not inviting John seemed like a wasted opportunity, especially like when we do eventually see John at the very end of the crossover event. Like, it's a comical moment that would have 100% worked in this episode, as far as how he gets there, and then he still could have, you know, helped the team and been invited to the wedding. Like, that's what really gets me, is that you don't invite John, but you invite a criminal.
Right. Crazy. And Iris being a very accepting person, I think we will very much so touch on at the end of this, at the end, because she definitely also shows how accepting she is of her life and the superheroes around her towards the end.
Yeah. I have, you know, and unfortunately I actually did not catch up on my notes today, but for this episode specifically, I have a lot broken down, and everything else I think I can go on the fly with. But I kind of have a couple bullet points, for what worked in this episode for me. And I tried to keep it to, since it's a Supergirl episode, I tried to keep up my notes, you know, geared towards that. So, three of the things that I think worked really well in this episode, is that Kara was still struggling with her human side. And I think that's like a very important arc that she has this season. I mean, it's defined this, you know, everything early on, and foreshadowed stuff down the road with Alex and her, you know, and her falling out with Maggie. And they still kind of are balancing this world where Kara doesn't, you know, she thinks she can avoid human emotion because she's an alien, but kind of like how Superman is, you know, supposed to be the most human out of everyone, when he's the alien. She's kind of the same way. Like, she's wears her emotions on her sleeve, and with Manel coming back, she has to deal with this wedding now. And I really like that they focused on that. Like, that at the rehearsal dinner, her and Barry talking was a really nice moment, I think.
Yeah. And Barry also asking her to do him a favor, using her vocal cords at the wedding. I was wondering if any of that was going to come into play, but we'll get into that on the next episode.
Yeah. Yeah, that was well, that happened on this episode,
too?
right?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, because the invasion, Earth Xers come during the ceremony, which is, I think, so yeah, and I really like, and it took me until she hit the chorus to realize that she was singing the song that Barry had sung to Iris in that episode last year, that specific Supergirl Flash crossover episode.
Oh, no. See, the reason I watch Supergirl so much is my 9-year-old daughter is in love with Supergirl, and she's the reason. Okay. And after last year's crossover, we listened to that mini soundtrack that they put out from the crossover many times. So as soon as that first note hit, I was like, oh, good. They included it somehow. I'm so happy we sang.
Yeah, and I need to buy that album because I really love that they did that song called Super Friend. And it was, I don't know, that song was really, and I don't remember it completely because I've listened to it once or twice from watching the episode, but that was one of my favorite songs from the crossover was that I think that was one of the, well, were they all original songs last year?
No, two of them were Rachel Bloom wrote the songs, the girl from My Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. Yeah, she wrote them, and one was Super Friends. And I forget which one the other one was, but
yeah, that was such a great little adorable song that it's kind of throwing back to the storylines of yesteryear and whatnot. I think and one of the things that I actually don't know if my prediction that I wrote down to my note about Kara dealing with her human side was that it felt like in that moment, in that conversation she had with Barry, that he was going to be the one that ultimately kind of helped her resolve this storyline and make her realize that, you need to, you are human. Like, you need to love again. You need to not think as an alien, because no matter what, you still are one of the most human people I know. It was the vibe that I thought we were going to get by the end of the episode. Like, kind of like last year, there was the moments of like all these characters kind of having little moments to tie up these little mini storylines that we got during the crossover. We kind of got that this year, but I guess it doesn't feel like maybe, and which is probably a good thing, that like she hasn't really resolved that by the end of this crossover. But it felt like Barry was going to be the one to do it, and who knows? I assume that we're going to have another crossover between just the Flash and Supergirl, because you cannot keep those two apart for long. I love their team.
Their chemistry is great. I mean, obviously the two actors have known each other for a long time since they were both on Glee together, so their chemistry is already there. And like we have already stated, their style of show is so similar; it works quite well.
It's, I mean, they both seem to operate on those 3 H's of heart, heroics, and humor. Oh, I remembered them. I always forget one of those 3 H's, but those, like, it seems like they have the same formula for how they write those 2 shows. And it makes sense that they would, because they both are the most lighthearted characters, even though, it seems like Supergirl's kind of in a quote unquote darker place this season than she was previously. And then Arrow's still the darker show, though it's definitely way more lighthearted than in years past.
So you mentioned formula. Also in this episode is my biggest issue with the character of Cisco overall is he puts it on display again in this issue, where he and Harry devise a cure for Firestorm. And my issue with Cisco is he's done this a few times where he's come up with he's solved a problem, like, oh, I can just invent that real quick, where it's kind of like, well, Cisco, why didn't you invent that 2 years ago? And then he just like whips something up real fast. Like I'm sure, Dr. Stein would have loved to have had this cure like 3 seasons ago. Like, where have you been, Cisco? You know what I mean? I just feel that's a common theme with his character sometimes, but
that just makes a lot of sense, because I mean, 3 years ago, he was forced to be joined with Ronnie. So if they could have just, instead of creating a little contraption, why not have that? Like, that's interesting. I didn't even cross my mind when that scene came up. And that was, and oh my God, we'll touch on this later, but I at this point in time, I had no idea how much I was going to care about the Firestorm storyline in this episode. And I will get, when we talk about Legends of Tomorrow, part 4, we'll get to it. But whew, it's at this point, like, I didn't really pay attention to it. Really, I mean, I saw it, paid attention to it, got it, like, noticed that there was some friction between Stein and Jackson, but I didn't really put two and two. Like, I didn't see what they were building, the foreshadowing that they had there. It didn't hit me until they slapped it in my face with that storyline. The other two things that worked for me in this episode was Alex and Sarah, their little, one night stand. And that's because Supergirl, I think, is like, they're very, very friendly to that community. And I like that they were able to kind of represent, like, because the typical, I guess, stereotype for when there's a breakup, girls are always kind of, stereotypically sitting around, moping around, eating ice cream. Whereas the guy is going out and having the one night stand. And it was nice to see that. And they, I mean, I think maybe they hit it a little too much on the nose when Alex actually said, "Oh, I'm a dirty guy. I actually had a one night stand, blah, blah, blah." I think they could have probably done without that dialogue to have it be a little bit stronger. But I like that they were able to kind of say that, you know what? You don't have to be a guy to deal with a breakup this way. It can be anybody that deals with a breakup this way. And so specifically the Alex storyline that they kind of touched on throughout this episode and the crossover in general, it just worked for me in this episode. And then this worked for me, and I listed it as something that didn't work for me. The Nazis being the bad guy, the central focus of the villains this year. It worked because, like, who can't get on board for punching a Nazi? But it did not work in the sense that it feels almost like a trope at this point to have the Nazis be your bad guy. And I think especially, like, in our current kind of political climate, it was maybe a little on the nose.
Yeah, this is my biggest gripe with the show of Supergirl this year, and Arrow did it a little bit last year, but Supergirl does it a lot this year, and for them to have it on this entire crossover, I feel like they were the writers. I feel like they have a very forced agenda that they've been pushing on their viewers. There, like you said, the dialogue wasn't needed. There's a lot of that on Supergirl this year. They enter climate change. They enter pro-gay marriage. A lot of political things that are very hot and heavy right now. And in my opinion, when I watch these comic book shows, I don't want to discuss this. Either side of the ball.
Yeah.
I don't care to discuss these things because I am pro-gay marriage, but I don't need it on personally. But I don't need to watch it while I'm watching Supergirl or explain it to my children at this time. And they do it a lot on Supergirl. So then for them to now have Nazis and talk about the Aryan race and etc. on this, and that's your big bad, it's like, wow, can you not be more obvious of where your political side is for writers and how we're going to portray everything for everyone watching? And that was a huge, huge disappointment for me. There's so many bad guys out there they could have used. Why Nazis? Why did we go Nazis in this route right during, just like you said, this entire political climate that we have? And in my opinion, it's because these Supergirl writers are so hell-bent on their agenda pushing.
Yeah, and you know what? I definitely felt that this year's season of Supergirl has a lot more of that to it. I think that maybe because especially since I was like 4 or 5 weeks behind. So I literally plowed through 20 episodes of Berlantiverse shows to get to caught up on Crisis here. That I don't think I really kind of focused on it probably as much as someone like it sounds like you watched it week to week,
Sure.
at least more so than I did. So, and I like my kids are too young to watch like these shows. I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. So, and my son, who is the older one, the 5-year-old, he does not like the sight of guns. He loves toy guns, loves Nerf guns, loves shooting me with them, but when he sees it on television, he gets freaked out by it.
Oh.
So so right now I don't really watch those shows with him. So like I don't like, I'm still at this point where I don't watch these shows necessarily as a parent. I watch them as a fan.
Sure.
And I don't know, for me, certain episodes of the Supergirl agenda, I guess we'll call it.
Sure.
I was okay with definitely the episode where her father, Maggie's father showed up.
Yeah.
That, feels like it could have been, I guess, maybe an agenda episode, but that one I actually really enjoyed. Like that one I felt like, all right, I dig the message that they're trying to send here, but it does, if I really sit down and think about it, it is super political and not super friend-like. It's not, it doesn't have the Supergirl this year isn't as lighthearted as it was last year. And I think that's probably part of the problem, is that the way they're writing their stories this year.
Yeah.
Is there anything else in this episode before we move on to what really didn't work that worked for you?
I liked the introduction early on. We didn't immediately know who the bad guys were outside of the Nazis, but we didn't immediately get who the main villains were. Playing. They didn't just throw that right at you, which was nice. I liked the build up. I liked all of the Kara and Alex actually getting her over the relationship stuff that you actually spoke of, because I'd like for them to move on from that and kind of get going. There's only so many episodes, like you said, of girls sitting around eating ice cream that folks want to watch. So
yeah.
I enjoyed that. And then no, we're on what worked for me. So yeah. So, I mean, overall, it was a great introduction episode. It got everybody together. It had a good reason to get everybody together. Despite the little nitpicky things that we mentioned a second ago. Joe's speech. I thought Joe's speech was good.
Yeah.
It was heartfelt, and they easily could have mailed it in with that one, something cheesy about love or something like that, and two kids finding each other. But he said it was about him, and it hit home for me personally, because I was once divorced and I had to go through that, where I had to refine things and relearn how to allow myself to get to that place again. And he used their love for each other as a inspiration for himself. And I thought that was great. And it was something a little different, but still drove home the point. So I'll also enter Joe's speech into the realm.
Yeah, no, you know what that was. And he was like, talk about like a low key player in this crossover episode. Like I mentioned John Diggle, but yeah, I mean, really beyond this and the ceremony, Joe, we don't even see him again, I think, after this at all. Like after the invasion, or after the ceremony, Wally is,
we lose Wally.
Wally is tasked with taking his dad and his future stepmom and brother, or sister, I guess we don't know what it is yet, the unborn child, into hiding. And like, that's it. Like, we don't see those three characters again, which is, I think it was curious of what heroes they decided to have in this crossover and what heroes they decided not to. Like, it was strange. Like, I think there's a world where Wally could be there and Joe and Cecile could be still safe somewhere. And same with John, in fact, in my notes, I have what I would have done differently. And one of my things is that Diggle, like, there's no reason Diggle should have even had nerve damage. Like, now that I know that the nerve damage seems like it was simply there to help get Oliver back in the suit for this crossover, because it already seems like they're setting it up to where he's almost better again. I feel like the next two episodes of Arrow, Diggle's going to be back in shape where he can take the hood again. I just feel like they could have had him come as the Green Arrow, and if they needed to put a costume on Oliver, and this is probably where a lot of people will disagree with me, but like, there's no reason he couldn't have put on the red suit if he needed to wear a hood during this crossover event. He could have easily just worn Speedy's outfit, while Diggle wore the Green Arrow outfit. I think it was just a weird move to not have Diggle there. That's like my biggest gripe of, I guess this episode and the crossover completely, not having him involved, and then just having some of the here, like Wally wasn't involved. Who I felt like there was someone else missing, but maybe it was just the Legends, and they finally came at the end.
Well, to me, I mean, you're hitting it perfectly, because I mean, Wally West is arguably as fast as the Flash almost.
Yeah.
He can keep up, and although they keep pushing this like he's still learning, he's still a rookie, well, at the same time, he's far better a superhero than 80% of the people they had fighting with him. So if we could, we can nitpick here and say, all right, why didn't Barry just say, Wally, take them to Elongated Man or Elastic Man or whomever they got on the show now. What is it? Elastic Man?
I think Elongated Man.
Is he Elongated Man? So take them to Elongated Man and tell him to protect them. Done. Or Barry turns to Cisco and says, hey, vibe them to the Green Arrow's lair where Diggle is just hanging out along with the rest of Green Arrow's gang, Team Arrow, and have them, who at this moment aren't part of this whole scenario, protect these two people. And then Wally, come on back, because I'm going to need you and your speed.
Yeah.
If we want to get nitpicky, it's kind of like that was my biggest thing. I was like, wow, why did they kick Wally out? They really could have used him, his powers, but we obviously know why. There's a couple other superheroes. There's a couple other heroes. That was a Freudian slip right there that I'm sure they could have used in this fight.
Yeah.
Along the way.
Totally. I think that going with still what didn't work for me, the one, and this is just a little fun thing that they did last year that I think they tried to replicate, and now that I've watched the whole series, the Rory and Supergirl stuff last year had me on the ground laughing. Like, my favorite Legend is Rory. Like, I just love that character, that he's still, despite being a hero now, he's still very much is like the anti-hero. And the way he interacted with Kara last year, calling her skirt, and just, I don't know, everything that I was looking forward to that in this crossover. I said, oh my God, we're going to get more Rory and Kara on screen together, and it's going to be amazing. And I don't think it happened at all. But now, again, after watching it, it seems like they've replaced that interaction with Killer Frost / Caitlin and Rory. They're the two that they kind of built some comedy off of.
That's true. Which one's Rory? The guy that was drinking?
Yeah, he's the one. Okay, well, now I think we know. I know.
I just totally gave away which show I don't watch.
Yeah. He's Heatwave. He's the one with the gun, the fire gun.
Yeah. Okay.
Though he also kind of took a backseat for a lot of the crossover as well, until I guess the end. But we'll get to that. Now, I think I've changed my mind on this. I initially had an issue with the ceremony being a focal point of this episode, because it made it feel like a Flash episode versus a Supergirl episode. I feel like they could have, at the time, I felt like maybe they could have maybe used the rehearsal dinner as a point. Like, if Earth Xers were there to specifically attack their Earth 1 counterparts, then they could have probably done it at the rehearsal dinner as well. I don't see why not. But I think this is one that I'm kind of stepping away from. That overall, now that I've seen all 4 episodes, I think it makes sense. And I don't know that I would have actually done anything differently. because I guess it does make sense
Yeah.
that the ceremony is where they get attacked.
Yeah, I mean, the bad guys are probably having a rehearsal of their own of the attack,
Yeah.
and they needed to have that so that we could get the Sarah and Supergirl's sister, whose
That's
name
true.
I'm blanking on.
Alex. Yeah.
Alex. Yeah, it did allow them to add a couple of those moments into it and a
Yeah.
couple of the rehearsal things into it, which were nice. But all right, that does move us on to the next episode.
Well, one last thing that I want to say that I did not like in this episode was that Oliver and Felicity totally made it about them at that rehearsal dinner. Like that felt very awkward and not something that I think Oliver and Felicity would have done. Like it seems like hey, let's force this story on people.
Mm-hmm. Was that and that was where she yelled, I don't want to marry you.
Yeah. And again, I mean, you know what? That we're gonna touch on that later too, because again, I feel like they just kind of like they tried to like. I don't know. I don't want to say that it was the characters trying to steal the show, but it was the writers making that. Like, it didn't. It felt out of character. I think the interaction between her and Oliver did not feel out of character, but I feel like they are both people that are smart enough to know where they're at and to not allow that to take away from Barry and Iris. Like,
Yep.
you're supposed to be best friends. At least Oliver and Flash, they're supposed to be best friends here. And it seems like a really inopportune time to start talking about this.
Yeah, very true. And I mean, this season of Arrow has, slowly led them to being together, but at a distance, and then for Oliver of all people to all of a sudden just be overwhelmed in the moment and then, push for it like that. I agree with you. It was a bit forced.
Yeah. All right. So overall, part one, I would actually have to say part one was probably the episode I enjoyed the least. But I also would say that it's like, if I had to give it a score, it's probably a solid like 8 or 8.5 out of 10.
Yeah, like I said, I kind of banged them all out in a row, so I'm trying to divide them up into individual, but
it was very hard to do that.
It would definitely be the least, since one has to be the least. But yeah, I'll give it an 8, just because it was a good introduction to the event. It was a good, first act.
And I will say this, it was actually, I think, going forward, it was hard for me to actually find things to not like in the rest of the crossover episodes. And I think it's because I stopped taking notes while I watched, and I took notes before I started watching Arrow. And when I watched Arrow, Flash, and Legends, I did not take notes in between. So, I think that I unfortunately gave Supergirl too much of a critique, and it affected how I felt about it. But we can move on to Crisis Part 2, which was Arrows. What are your thoughts on Part 2?
Good. This is when the story gets going. This is when, now we get to meet the actual villains and see who they are. And this is, even though I think anyone that saw any promos were kind of expecting 2 of the doppelgangers to be them, I then was thrown off as to who. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting a 4th. I'm forgetting of the Prometheus mask.
Yeah.
And then who the speedster was, and that was a big shocker.
Yeah. Well, so I'll say this. I was definitely shocked by Prometheus, which we'll get to in a second.
Yeah.
I knew who the actors were in the other 3 roles. I knew, I knew, I spoiled myself on Reverse Flash, but, I did not realize, and I thought this was interesting. I just assumed that it was, it was, I guess Thawne on Earth X, never, had to give up the body of Wells. But as it turns out, that was the Thawne of Earth 1, that somehow he's still alive. And honestly, his storyline is the biggest confusion I have about the Flash, because he's died so many times.
Right.
But I thought that was super interesting that Thawne is actually still alive. And that last year he was in his natural body on Legends. But now he's back after dying, and he's decided to take the face of Tom Cavanaugh, and which I'm assuming was more of a, well, let's just use Tom because he crushed it. And that's something that I love about Tom Cavanaugh, is that he can, I love the episodes where they, like the Council Wells episode where they brought in more, give me an episode that's literally just, like Tom Cavanaugh acting in every part. Like, I don't need anybody else. I would watch that.
Sure.
So that's what surprised me about that speedster, was that it was Earth's One's Eobard Thawne, who came back, and he was working with a bunch of Nazis for some reason, which I felt like that could have, I don't think that was cleared up. Maybe I didn't pay attention close enough, but I never really got why he was working with this 53rd Earth, which I think is important to talk about. I don't know what episode they start talking about the multiverse. It may have been this one. But they talk about how there's 52 Earths, kind of, taking a page out of the comic books.
Yeah.
But then diverts when Harry says that, well, there's actually a 53rd Earth X. Because I was always under the impression, and I think, and of course I would need to pull it up and be way more prepared, but when they first said it was Crisis on Earth X, I assumed that meant Crisis on Earth 10. And I think I looked up Earth 10 in the DC multiverse map for the comic books, and I think that is a Nazi-based Earth.
Oh, really? Huh.
We're a villain. I'm gonna see if I could do this without screwing anything up. But while I'm looking this up, do you want to touch on like some of the things that worked on Arrow for you?
Yeah. So now, like we were saying, they get the introduction to the villains. I liked the 52 Earths because I think it was just throwing a nod to the New 52, which is what the comics just wrapped up 2 years ago. Their little New 52 series that they did on the actual comics. So I thought that was pretty cool. And now they get everyone together, finally figuring out, now we've got to fight these guys, and now we're banding together, and it's just giving you the Super Friend team up that we are wanting, and that they're all going to be together, which is good. Let's see, trying to find my notes to be specific to the Arrow show here for you.
And I'll tell you what, this is, and I think especially the way they started this episode off, it felt very much like an Arrow episode, while still being while the crossover was the focal point. Like, I think more so than the previous episode, while the main story was still the crossover, it felt like they were focusing on Arrow related storyline as well. Mm-hmm. But in such a way where, like, last year's Arrow episode was in tone an Arrow episode. It celebrated Arrow. It was kind of like a repilot of that show, because it was the 100th episode, and that you could have literally never watched an episode of Arrow up until that point, and you would have caught up on its entire history last year in that crossover episode. While this one, I feel like Arrow's episode last year you could have watched and not watch any other part of the invasion, and you still would have been okay with the story and not been like, well, what are the Dominators? What's going on? Like, it was way less crossover oriented. This year, you would have been lost had you not watched part 1, 3, and 4.
Sure.
But it still felt very I guess we don't have to dance around it anymore. I was shocked. I don't know who I was expecting behind the mask of Prometheus. But I was not expecting Tommy Merlin.
Nope. That was probably the best part.
Yeah. And just to go back to what I started doing when I got sidetracked myself. Yeah, according to DCComics.com, Earth 10 is an Earth where Hitler, won.
Oh.
So it's interesting because it sounds like that like on the Flash there is an Earth 10, but there's also an Earth X, and that's the Nazi one is Earth X. So, which is fine. I mean, they can take a different path. I'm not begrudging them for that, but it's just interesting that they kind of in a world where they kind of I feel like comic book properties that kind of pay attention to their art, like the comic books. I feel like the Berlantiverse doesn't stray too far from it often, but maybe I just don't read enough comics.
Yeah, I mean, they stay true to the basics for the most part, but they definitely do get their liberties. I mean, i.e., Flashpoint was a humongous liberty that they had to take. But so I don't know. Maybe they just wanted to save 52 to throw a nod to the new 52.
Maybe
they could have said that and still said, well, number 10 is the Nazi one, but
yeah, and they call it Earth X because no one. It's the hell of all.
Maybe in the original script they were going to blow up Earth X to try and get rid of it, but they brought in Joss Whedon at the end to change things up, so he changed the ending to make it a little bit lighter. So that's why they didn't do it. I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah. Something that my quick thoughts on this episode was loving the fact that Tom Cavanaugh was playing the villain, or a villain.
Mm-hmm.
He was playing both a good guy and a villain, but his main role in this crossover was as Eobard Thawne in Whale's makeup. And one of the opening lines to this episode was when it was the opening scene where I think it was the opening scene where the three of them are like evil Oliver, evil Kara, and Thawne were kind of like getting distracted with one another, and he says to evil Oliver, "Be 10% less brooding." And his delivery, his delivery was way better than what I just said. I had to pause the show, go to my notes app, and write that down because it's everything I love about Tom Cavanaugh and what he can do with that character of Harrison Wells, whether he's playing, Harry from Earth 2, whether he's playing Harrison Wells from Earth 1, who was really Eobard Thawne, or whether he's playing the Matthew McConaughey version of Harrison Wells from Earth 17 or whatever it was in the Cancel Wells episode. He is such an amazing actor, he is the biggest win for me. I'm glad I discovered him through this because I would have never known Tom Cavanaugh outside of the show if it wasn't for the way he plays Harry.
Yeah, they definitely don't use Tom Cavanaugh's talents as much as they should, and I'm enjoying this season, like you said, where they're giving him more stuff to do. It's fantastic, and they're letting him show off his acting prowess because he is a great actor. Another line that worked for me when our good Barry, Kara, and Oliver are racing to get to the bad guys and fight them, the three of them together, and you see Barry super speed, and then Kara flies in super quick. And then we wait a beat, and then Oliver shows up on the bike, and then Oliver jumps off, and he's just, quick reminder, super speed. I don't have it. And then the two of them give that look like, oh, right, sorry about that.
Yeah, I feel like specifically this episode and the Flash episode, they and maybe Supergirl and Legends had it too, but I really only pulled quotes from those two episodes. The dialogue was really strong and really funny and comical, and surprisingly Arrow and the Flash during this crossover.
Yeah, this part was a blast. Yeah.
I also never knew that how much I wanted a Supergirl and Arrow ship before, until I saw their evil counterparts were married.
That was an interesting little twist, but as soon as they did, it was like, all right, I can see them having a little fun with that, adding a little flavor to it, and then seeing the good side of the doppelgangers react to seeing the two of them together, and Kara being like, "Ew!" Oh, sorry, no offense, but ew.
But it totally made me like, I saw that and I was like, oh man, I can see a world where like they could totally go down this storyline if they wanted to. It would be an odd mixing, an odd pairing, because Oliver's a little too broody, maybe, for Kara, but it's definitely something that I remember when everyone was starting to ship Supergirl and the Flash, based off of that the first crossover episode from Supergirl season 1, and I was still pro, as you know, I don't know how people feel about Iris and Barry. I guess, obviously good because they're married now, but spoilers. But I've always been like a Caitlin and Barry fan. And especially during that, when people were starting to say Super Flash or whatever they were calling that relationship, I was like, no, Snowberry. I want Snowberry. But I could totally see Super Arrow or whatever you would call their ship. And I mean, I guess we won't get it because they don't live on the same Earth. That's something that I thought was pretty intriguing about Earth X, is that that was a world where Supergirl and presumably Superman, and I guess maybe you could defer that Batman maybe even existed. Like all these characters that are currently split up onto two different Earths, Earth 38, 48, wherever Supergirl's from, and Earth 1. They all those characters coexist. Guardian, Win, I assume Alex, but they never really clarified whether it was Alex Danvers who was Evil Kara's sister or not on Earth X. All these characters exist on one planet, on one Earth, which was a neat, like that. I kind of, and I don't know if, because I never really read DC Comics until like my maybe mid 20s is when I started reading Batman by Scott Snyder. I was always more of a Marvel person, and then like a Batman fan through other media.
Okay.
So I don't know like the source material to these crossovers at all. So I don't know if this is the one, but I at the beginning of this event, I thought that maybe this would lead to like the collapse of the multiverse, and Kara would finally be part of the Earth 1 stuff. But I can understand why they didn't do it, because then you're gonna have crossovers all the time. But is the Crisis storyline, is that like in the comic? I don't know if you know, is that in the comic books? Is that where, like, didn't the Earth collapse at one point?
See, that's they did that after they needed to clean up some offgoing, some offshoot storylines that they, after Crisis, then combined almost everything down to one. And that was one thing as a DC reader growing up that I never could wrap my head around, was if there's multiple Earths and then there's multiple Supermans and multiple Batmans, like, that means that he wasn't the last son of Krypton, because he was just the last son of this universe's Krypton. So there's another guy. And so that I liked when DC cleaned it all up and condensed it down a little bit. But then that's something that bothers me, if we want to, again, get nitpicky with all of these, with Supergirl on her show and with some of these other guys on their show, when they get in trouble, Superman's not far away. Or Batman's not, they've never referenced him except for saying Bruce Wayne once on Arrow. But I've always if this person's in this big of trouble, i.e. like this big crisis, like, why wouldn't Kara call her cousin and be like, hey, you're kind of strong. Why don't you just give us a hand on this little situation we've got going on? You know what I mean? So I think that's a big reason why they haven't collapsed him on the TV shows yet.
Yeah, and I think that I understand like the difficulty of maybe her having to call her cousin across. Like, she was on Earth 1, he's on Earth whatever. So I can see the difficulty of getting him involved, but like, and this is something that is in, I think, the Flash app. I don't know. It wasn't in this one. It happened either in part 3 or part 4. But she says something about to Thawne, saying if if you kill me, my cousin will come after you. And what's interesting is what he had to say. His response to that was that, "Oh, I've faced your cousin before." And he says this, and you have to remember, this is Thawne of Earth 1. So, like, is there a timeline in Earth 1 where Superman and maybe Supergirl and Batman, like, is there a timeline on Earth 1's universe where Superman exists? Or was he referencing the fact that, like, he's met Superman on another parallel Earth or something?
I'm not sure. I thought that on Supergirl's show, I thought that her and Superman were on the same Earth. Okay, yeah.
Yes. On Supergirl's show, they are on Earth 48, and it's been implied that her cousin has worked with a masked vigilante before. Yes. So, like, they've made a Batman reference without dropping names, but they've made the masked vigilante reference. So I fully believe that there's a Batman on Earth 48 or whatever Earth that, we could get a Batman cameo pretty easily on Supergirl, I think. But she was on Earth 1 when she said something to Thawne about her cousin.
Okay.
And
so since he's Earth 1 guy, you're right. He would have had to go to that other Earth to fight him, or there's like in the future, because he's from the 31st century.
He's like
the
great grandkid of the
Eddie,
other Thawne,
yeah.
Eddie Thawne. I think. I mean, he killed himself, so maybe not. I don't know how this guy exists anymore. But regardless, Eobard Thawne exists on Earth 1. He even said, "I'm from your Earth" at some point in this crossover. So it's and this is just me being, all right, I need to, like, this is something that was said, and now I need to know what it means. And it has nothing to do with the crossover, but yeah, like, I wonder if it was just from him battling Superman on another Earth, or if it was in the whatever century he's from, Superman exists, which could imply that maybe the Earths are going to collapse at some point.
Cool. Do it. Bring them all together. But that's a different a different show.
Yeah. I would say, so one of the big things that worked for me, in this episode, was Tommy as Prometheus. I thought that was really interesting. I don't know who I would have, that was the last person, like I said earlier, who I thought it was going to be behind that mask. Like, did you have any idea who was going to be Prometheus? Did you have any guesses?
Completely threw me off. And as I was looking at it, I was like, wow, why is that guy, there? And I wasn't even thinking, like, I wonder who that could be. And then when we took the mask off, they got me. They got me on that one.
Yeah. I almost thought it would be interesting if Oliver Queen ended up being the Prometheus on Earth X. It just kind of seemed like it would be nice symmetry from, last year's storyline. And that would have left it open for someone else to be, I don't even know what he called. I mean, he was the Fuhrer. Right. So I don't know. Like, they didn't call him Green Arrow. They didn't really he didn't have a code name. He just dressed as a vigilante that wore a hood and shot arrows. So I feel like that could have been a cool storyline where maybe they had somebody else play the quote unquote evil Arrow and Oliver was the Prometheus. But I guess this makes, like, if you really think about it, it makes way more sense the way they did it, because, in a world where there is no Malcolm Merlin plot to blow up the city, Tommy doesn't die, and he's, they live in a Nazi America where Oliver's, like, I guess, in charge of the Nazi army, and his best friend is working with him.
Yeah, it would make sense.
I dug that. This is where I didn't take many notes at all. I just put one bullet point here and there. I did not like the lack of Diggle again, especially with this being more of an Arrow episode, and it felt like an Arrow episode at points. Here's the thing, like, and this is kind of falls in line with what, like, I maybe would have done differently, is you didn't even really need Diggle of Earth 1. You could have had Diggle of Earth X, because I believe we see Earth X in this episode at some point, and we could have seen Diggle of Earth X playing the role of Green Arrow. Like, he could have been the hero. Like, in fact, my guess is, maybe this is true, that Oliver on Earth X was actually the Dark Archer, the Malcolm Merlin character.
Okay.
And you could have had somebody else playing the role of Green Arrow, and that could have been Diggle,
sure,
100% on Earth X.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that's the only thing I would have really done differently. These next part 2, 3, and 4, I watched the way you watched all 4 of them, a little bit more seamlessly. Okay. So it's hard for me to now sit here and pick them apart individually. But yeah, I enjoyed this episode. I just think that there was a couple missed opportunities with the character Diggle, whether you're talking Earth 1 Diggle or Earth 10 Diggle. And something that I just thought about now is, like, where was Barry Allen? Like, where was Earth X Barry Allen?
that was what surprised me when we saw that it was Thawne. I was then thinking, well, where's Barry? Where's their speedster?
Yeah. Yeah, because as established, this speedster is not even from Earth X. Like, he showed up on Earth X somehow, which I wonder if we're going to get that answer. Like, how did Thawne get to Earth X? Because last time we saw him, he died on Legends, or I think it was Legends. He like that weird Flash speedster ghost.
Oh, the Speed Force guys.
Yeah, like, I think they got, if I remember correctly, they finally caught him in Legends last year, and that's how he died. Like, he got erased from existence or something. I don't really. Gotcha. Unfortunately, one of the things, and maybe that will change going forward, but as much as I enjoy Legends, it is the more forgettable show because it's just more of like it's way more lighthearted, not lighthearted, but it's I don't take it as seriously because they have just fun wacky adventures every week. It has less of a storyline, I think, or at least less of a storyline that requires my attention. So I forget how I think that's how Thawne died. Regardless, he's still alive, and I want to know how he got to Earth X. But yeah, what for this second part here, is there anything else that you have as far as what you want to touch on for what worked, what didn't work?
Yeah, just 2 more things that I enjoyed in there, straight comic book fanfare. I enjoy Killer Frost. I like it. I liked this where Caitlin could just be Killer Frost, and I liked them trying to make her Killer Frost and scare her, or when she gets nervous. I liked all that, and her being Killer Frost. And then I also liked Metallo.
Oh yeah,
completely randomly just throwing Metallo into the mix out of nowhere. I was like, whoa, that's awesome. He came out of nowhere, and obviously Kara didn't see it coming either because he blasted her with the kryptonite ray.
I thought to touch on what your points. I loved the Rory and Killer Frost stuff. I don't think it was as strong as the Rory and Kara stuff from last year's crossover.
Nah.
But it still worked, and this is going beyond the crossover. But I love the like. There's been a lot of Marvel references, I think, in Arrow alone. Well, Arrow and maybe it was Legends. It was Flash. Yeah, Flash made the reference of made the reference of the Incredible Hulk. When on Girls' Night Out, I believe. When she was talking about losing control and when she gets angry and whatnot, and I think it was this is why I confused it with Arrow when Felicity said, "Oh, that's like the Incredible Hulk."
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then there, in another episode, they made a Spider-Man reference. I forget when. I think it was during the crossover
when they came up with the formula, and then Stein came up with his own version.
Yeah,
that'll still give Jax superpowers, and it'll make him Sticky Man like a spider. And he's like, "What am I, a Spider-Man?"
Yeah. It's interesting. I know, like, I expect on like Agents of Shield or any of the Marvel shows to hear like these references to even like, hey, we're gonna make a reference to Star Wars because we own it. It was kind of like I like that they're not so beholden to the DC properties that they're willing to reference Marvel properties. And obviously, I assume in the world of Earth One, that the Incredible Hulk and Spider-Man and stuff are just forms of entertainment that they can go pick up at the local comic book store or watch at their local cinema. So, but it was like a neat little like, you know, DC like not shitting on Marvel. Really, like it was like embracing Marvel.
Yeah. So something that didn't work for me, and I'll be honest, it gets a little better, but not totally better. At this point, we've established the doppelgangers. We've established Melissa Benoist is playing, the bad Kara, and Stephen Amell is playing the bad Arrow. I felt they missed a mark on like really going over the top with a different character. There was a lot of just their acting styles that were just very similar. And I felt this would have been a great chance for them to like really play a different character. I understand they're supposed to be the doppelganger, so they are supposed to be similar to a degree, but I thought like you get to be evil. She gets to be completely badass. She could come with a deeper voice, a darker tone, little things like that. And so I kind of, there's a couple scenes where I was like, well, that's just Stephen Amell just in a black suit. And that's just Melissa Benoist just in a, in a black with a different logo type thing. And so I was a little let down, I guess I'll say with that. Not a lot. I'm nitpicking, definitely. But I thought as actors, they both could have made stronger choices in those roles.
Well, and I think this is where Tom Cavanaugh definitely shined, and I guess maybe he has more experience, just playing because he's played this character before. He played it in season 1 of The Flash, so and I think he toned it up a little bit more. He was a little bit more evil than he was in season 1 of The Flash.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought like as far as like bad guys, I thought he did a wonderful job throughout the crossover, and I will agree with you specifically with Melissa Benoist. It was hard to buy her as a villain, like,
yeah.
And I don't know if it's the choices she made, or just like she just looks like too much like a goody two shoes. Watching, especially when she unmasks for the first time at the end of the first part here, and she says something, you could tell she was trying to say it in like a broody, evil way. And I feel like they should have taken another take of that scene because it did not work. And it got better after that. When we first see in the end of part 1 who these bad guys are, and that it's just evil doppelgangers, I was really worried that we were going to get some shitty acting from Melissa Benoist as a bad guy. It got better, but not by much. It was very similar.
Yeah.
It was Melissa. I mean, and honestly, maybe it's because Supergirl has been, I don't know if broody is the right word, but she's not been her happy-go-lucky self lately. So maybe that's why it was too similar, because we basically got like the good guy version of broody Supergirl.
Valid.
This season. Stephen Amell's, I feel like it's hard because I feel like he was just doing like he's no longer as Earth 1 Oliver, he's no longer that broody. I feel like that was season 1, season 2 Oliver.
Sure.
Where it was just let me be broody all the time. And like, I mean, really, if you think about season 1 Oliver, and he's kind of he's a villain. He's not a good guy. He's straight up murdering people.
Right.
So like, it almost felt like that's who this Earth X, like that's how Mel played Earth Xer, was like, let me just kind of do my broody thing. And I don't think it was bad, but you're right. I think they could have made different choices and taken the opportunities that Tom Cavanaugh took to really, separate themselves as this is how I play a good guy and this is how I play a bad guy.
So I'll see your Tom Cavanaugh and agree with you, but then I'll raise you a Paul Blackthorne because the Nazi Lance was fantastic.
Yes. And that, I don't know was that in this episode or part 3 that we get that reveal?
It was 3. I thought we were on to 3. It was in 3. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so we will get to 3.
Sorry, I'm excited for Lance. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. We will get to part 3 and 4 next week, guys. That's right. This is going to be a 2-part episode because I feel like we're going to go at least another hour on the next 2 parts. So, we're going to continue to talk about this, but for you, the audience, we're taking a quick break. Brian, give some plugs to people.
Sure. You can find me regularly every week on Take Two Podcast. Our show is on iTunes, Stitcher, and Podbean. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at Brian Stever. You can hit me up there. You can also hit up our show at Take Two Podcast on Twitter. We're also on Facebook. And obviously, you can email us, take2podcast@gmail.com. We have a bunch of specialty shows that also come out. We have the wrestling show we talked about earlier, Take Two Takedown, and a Take Two Spotlight and Take Two Soundtracks that give you breakdowns of characters and actors and also musical soundtracks of individual movies that we do as well. So check us out.
Yes, they're the Take Two Empire, as I called them at one point. They're taking over the podcasting lands, much like the Earth Xers. You're the Earth Xers of podcasting, is what I've just discovered. Make sure you follow this show on Twitter at Real Awesome Pod. You can follow us on Facebook.com/Real Awesome Pod. That's where we do a lot of our announcing of things and promoting of live shows like we have December 17th. That is, by the time this airs, I think like 10 days away. So make sure you come out to Amalgam Comics and Coffee House on December 17th in Philadelphia, PA, to watch us celebrate 100 episodes of Awesome. It's going to be Heart Points Pod opening up for us. I don't know. That's weird to say that they're opening up for us because we're just a bunch of live podcasters. But Heart Point Pods is going to be playing their game and doing some fun RPG stuff. And to celebrate 100 episodes, we're playing games too. And I'm bringing Jeff Stormer from the Party One podcast along with me so we can sit around and play some tabletop at Amalgam Comics and Coffee House on Frankfurt Ave in Philadelphia, PA. Check that out from 3:30 p.m. to 6 p.m. Those 2 shows on December 17th. 2017. And you can find me on Twitter at ThatNerdyKev. That's where I do most of my tweeting, even for this show. Until next week, when we talk part 3 and part 4 of Crisis on Earth X, I'm Kev, and we've been awesome.
Thank you for listening to the Court and Parts Podcast Network. To listen to more Court and Parts shows, visit courtandarts.com.